And there we go. All right. Thanks again. Welcome, everybody. So welcome to the Speculative Literature Foundation, San Francisco Bay Area chapter. Today's panel is How Do Speculative Fiction Writers Get Grants? And we're joined by panelists Mary Ann Mohanraj, Raina J. León, Nina Woodruff-Walker, and Setsu Uzumé, who we'll introduce right before we start the panel. This is being done webinar style, so you won't be able to speak directly to panelists, but we do have the Q&A panel open, and about 2:45, we'll actually open up the entire panel to Q&A for folks, so you'll be able to ask any questions live time at that point. So what is the SLF? Founded in January 2004 by Mary Ann Mohanraj, the Speculative Literature Foundation promotes literary quality in speculative fiction. It's an all-volunteer staff led by Mary Ann and 30 other committed volunteers. The foundation maintains a comprehensive website offering information for readers, writers, editors, and publishers of speculative fiction. They develop book lists, a bunch of other things, outreach materials for schools, libraries. They raise funds for redistribution to other organizations out in the field, as well as give 5 awards, which we're going to talk about later today, annually to writers, including the Diverse Worlds and Diverse Writers Grants. So for more information, please visit speculativelyterature.org. So speaking of those grants, just now awarded this week, SLF is pleased to announce that Kiran Kaur Saini, I hope I'm saying that right, is the winner of the 2020 Older Writers Grant. The Speculative Literature Foundation's Older Writers Grant is awarded annually ever since 2004 to a writer who is 50 years of age or older at the time of their grant application. So this grant is intended to assist such writers who are just starting to work at their professional levels. This is a $1,000 grant. It can be used as each writer determines will best assist their work. And I'll pass it off to Jasmine.
Everybody, I hope everybody's having a good day so far. Thanks for being here. Before we jump into the questions and the content that you're all here for, I just want to go over our Brave Spaces statement, which we say every chapter meeting. We'd like to share our commitment to inclusive community for SFBA SLF, that's the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of the Speculative Literature Foundation. Adapted from one of our local community nonprofit partners, Nomadic Press. We want SLF-SF Bay Area to be an inclusive space for those who have been historically silenced and marginalized. There is no room for racism, misogyny, homophobia, or transphobia here, whether in the context of one's readings or in one's interactions with members of this community. We will protect the safety of this space by muting and removing any participant if we feel they have violated these guidelines. And we encourage community members to come to us, whether via chat or contacting us outside of these meetings, if someone has violated these guidelines outside of this session. We are a community and we work together to ensure the safety of our most vulnerable members, and that is prioritized above all else. So let's get started. Just as a quick reminder, you can send us questions to ask the panelists toward the end of the panel. And also Raina will be contributing to the panel, but also has to leave to go teach a class at 2:45. So we're just keeping that in mind. So panelists, are we ready? Can we get a thumbs up if you're ready to jump in? Perfect. So first question, I would love it if each of you could give like a brief introduction, whatever you feel like sharing about yourself, and let us know what your experience with grants has been thus far.
I can go first.
Perfect.
So, hey y'all, I'm Raina León, and I am a mother listening to her child resist nap time right now. In addition, I'm a professor of education over at St. Mary's College, a poet, a writer, an editor for the Essentials Review, Raising Mothers, a number of other journals as well. And I have a few books, primarily in the space of poetry. My first chapbook, Profeta Without Refuge, which was published a few years ago, focused on the world that I'm writing into a novel right now. It was very focused on Black immortals who have vampiric tendencies and these intersections with an eco-poetics as well as Black feminist framing and so on. So my experience with grants, residency. So that's really my area. I've served as a juror. We'll talk, a number of us were talking about that earlier, for other spaces, but really in the creation of residency programs. So I was a partner with Arisa White and Elizabeth Gessel over at the Museum of the African Diaspora to create a poet in residence program there. And then went on to become their coordinator for that program. And then I've also done a lot of residencies, both here in the States, as well as primarily in Ireland. And so I'm really excited to talk to y'all about like dreaming into wherever y'all need to go to create your work. So.
Who would like to go next?
I can go next. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Nina Woodruff-Walker. I am from Oakland, very proud to say that I'm from East Oakland, and I'm the executive director for the Museum of Children's Art. Some of you know us as MoCA. We provide artists and residencies in local elementary and middle schools. We also have a space in City Center in Oakland where we have exhibitions offering youth work as well as some adult work. And then we also have Open Studio. Before the pandemic, we had Open Studio and some other programming in our space, and then programming in the libraries and in communities as well. My perspective is mostly as a juror, as well as overseeing some of the language that's going out to apply for grants. I have taken backup poetry in my older age, so very happy that I've brought that back into my world, and excited to be here today. Thank you.
I'll go next. I'm Setsu Uzumé. My primary responsibilities right now are being the host and assistant editor of Podcastle, which is a fantasy publication. We're part of Escape Artists, which also covers science fiction at Escape Pod, horror at Pseudopod, and young adult fiction at Cast of Wonders. I also write fiction, and I just started writing for games. And my primary interaction with with grant writing is I went to a panel hosted by the Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts and took down all of my notes and put them up on the Science Fiction Writers of America blog. So this is all very entry-level information, but it should be broad-ranging, and I hope that it can be of some use in our discussion.
And I'm Marianne Mohanraj. My experience with the grants, I think, must have started in grad school when I did an MFA at Mills College. A lot of the graduate programs have internal grants meant for their students, so the competition is a small pool, and I got a tiny grant there. I can't remember, $500 or something like that. Very appreciated at the time, and later ended up doing, I went to Clarion as a science fiction writer in the middle of that MFA, but then went on and did a PhD in creative writing at the University of Utah, which is a combined lit creative writing degree. And there had a fellowship so that for a year after I was done with coursework, I was paid to read and read for my exams and take my exams, which was amazing. Since then, there have been various and sundry other grants. CAP grant, the city of Chicago gives grants to artists. I live in just outside Chicago now, but I was in the city at the time. And those are considered gateway grants. They're 70% of applicants get the grant because they're designed, they're smaller grants again, I think 500 or so, and they're designed to encourage people to apply for grants, get used to the grant writing process. They do a lot of hand-holding with seminars and so on to walk you through it and make it as easy and transparent as they can. And then an Illinois Arts Council grant, which was, the money for those kind of come and go depending on the state budget at the time, but that year it was $7,000, which was super helpful. I know it was really great. So those are like the grants I've received. I've been a juror on several different grants, and we'll probably get to that. The ones at the SLF, we started because I was in grad school when I started the foundation, and the main reason was that I wanted to get a travel grant to do research in Sri Lanka for the book I was working on, and could not find one, and was frustrated. And I was like, there should be such a thing. So the first grant we put together was the travel grant. And then, and part of why I wanted the SLF to do it is because what I was seeing was this division between my friends in literary fiction who were very used to the grants ecosystem and that expecting that to be part of the process. I've also done residencies at Ragdale, which is a residency program here in Lake Forest, just north of Chicago, which is terrific and so valuable. And what I was seeing was that the science fiction fantasy writers were not applying. It's not that they often assumed they wouldn't get them, or they weren't aware that they existed, but either way. And so when we started the SLF grants, the idea behind it was that it would again serve as a gateway grant and just make it as simple as possible to apply, free to apply. Hopefully it shouldn't take, assuming you have a good writing sample, it shouldn't take more than maybe half an hour of your time to apply for one of our grants. And that would then get people used to it. And you know, I don't know, maybe we could talk more about this, but I think it historically comes out of science fiction fantasy thinking of themselves as like, well, we're commercial writers. We don't need to apply for grants. The market will tell us whether we're good or not. And I don't know, the market lies. So I think so. I don't generally want to rely on the market to tell me anything. So I'll pause there. So.
Fantastic. Setsu, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just thinking at some point we should talk about like the commonalities between writing for grants and doing pitch meetings and submissions for short fiction, because there's so much in common with that process.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's on our those commonalities, right? And I love that Marianne also pointed out around you know, the grant process for the foundation being a half an hour. And for me, I do a lot of teaching with folks around writing grants and applying for residencies. And one of the things that I talk to my, you know, co-learners about is, you know, set up a press kit. I call it a press kit of like, here's your bio, here's your artist statement, here's your project proposal for the dream project that you would want to do. Here's a list of your references. Here is a list of all the places you would want to be, because once you spend that time and put it all together, then it's easy. Then like anytime you see something, it's like, oh, they want a bio? No worries, I got my 500 word, I got my 50 word, I got my 250, I got it all. But it requires like some time to get it all together. And then after that, it takes a little bit of the stress out of it and the self-doubt out of it of like, well, I don't have this, I don't have that. Actually, now you have it all together.
Especially in addition to like the 200-word bio, the 50-word bio, like if you wear different hats as a writer, whether it's like if you write horror over here or science fiction over here, if you write on, you know, social justice issues over here, if you write on environmental issues over here, like if you have all of those bios set up and ready to go, you're able to just like leap on an opportunity as soon as you come across it.
Yeah, and you can actually put that info on your website as well. So if you go to my website, in my bio section, I have those different versions there, which just saves me some time, because if someone's doing an article about me, they can go grab whichever bio they want out of there, and I don't have to think about it. So.
Okay, can we real quick, for people who might be new to this concept, what might go into the press kit beyond the bio? So there's bio, maybe different kinds of bios, and then what else?
Oh, can we talk about the difference between a bio and an artist statement?
Yeah.
We can, yeah, go ahead.
Did you want to take that through, or I can jump in?
Oh, please.
And can I just, I'll just briefly say the SLF grants are simpler than many of the grants out there. So we ask for very little. We ask, I think, for a writing sample and a short bio, and that might be it. I'd have to go and look again. But as you go further along in the process, many places will ask you for more things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually really like Creative Capital is a massive grant, right? And is amazing opportunity for a lot of people. What I love about them, I've never gotten one of theirs before, but I have loved that they're so transparent about their process. And all of their questions. Like you can watch video after video of them breaking down what they're asking for and how to support that process. And they provide all of their questions. So I actually recommend to some of my students to take that resource and create a press kit based off of that so that they have it for anything. And so that when you're applying for the foundation grants where it's like, I got my bio and my work sample ready to go. And then you're building out from there. The difference between a bio and an artist statement, I actually talk with people a lot about studying the bios of your mentors and seeing how they frame their bios and what's actually expressed within them. What do they want to prioritize? Sometimes it's their particular social location. Sometimes it's cities. Sometimes it's the kind of writing they do. But if generally there's also some pieces around like where they published, what they want to contribute to the world in their writing. And then there are people who are very different from that. But the bio versus the artist statement. The artist statement, there's a website called Get Your Shit Together. It's GYST. And it's really focused on visual artists. And it breaks down artist statements and project proposals. But I find it super exciting to use the questions from their artist statements, which when they're like, well, what are your materials? We're writers, we have materials too, right? Like, it's just not paint. It's not, our materials are research. Our materials are connected to metaphor, like our magic making, like we have materials as well. Our references are different, right? They're not visually motivated, but they are connected to, a particular stream of legacy within literature. So the artist statement says, is as much for the grantor though, and that's for a lot of people is like, oh, it's so painful. How do I talk about my work in a way that is not so painful? And one way for me is that the artist statement is not just for them. The artist statement is also for you, because when you're looking at your work and you have to describe it to people as like, what are the commonalities within your work? What are your central questions? What are the themes across your work? That means you have to study you. And you have to be clear about what you are doing. And you may never have been clear before. You may have been like, something sparks and I do, and I create, and I go this way. But oftentimes we have our patterns, we have our concerns, we have our connective pulls, right? And sometimes that artist statement process can help us to clarify our work within the world. So yeah, the bio is very different than the artist statement. And the artist statement doesn't have to be painful. I should say that.
Another thing I want to mention as a resource for writing artist statements, being an editor for short fiction, as you see a lot of stories coming in, there's some common pitfalls and things that people don't quite do to stand out the way that they might like to. There was one essay by Steve Lambert called No Longer Interested, which is kind of like how to write an artist statement that really digs into the core of your work, saying like, I'm interested in running is a very different statement than I'm going to do beta breakers next year. It's just kind of like specifying and digging into the core of what you're actually interested in.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm imagining, a situation, we're working on this press kit, and we're making progress with that. But like, in terms of finding grants to apply to, where do you typically look? And are there any in particular that we just want to name that are specifically geared towards speculative fiction writers? I know we're all going to go to the SLF website after this, right? Any other ones that come to mind? Just let's think about that.
So I'll throw out one thing is that Nalo Hopkinson is not doing this anymore. Now she's a professor in California, but when she was living in Toronto, she worked for the Canadian Arts Council as their grants person, and she would put out a list every month of here's the grants that are coming up. So there's often state resources, and you can get, I'm on the mailing list for the Illinois Arts Council, so I get in my email little reminders, hey, our next grant is coming up, this is the deadline, blah, 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 right? So I would definitely get on, check your city, check your state, and Canada is particularly good about promoting their authors and supporting them. in part because they're competing against America. I don't know where people are watching this from, so check your country as well, right? They may well have resources that you can apply for. In science fiction, one of the, I'm trying to remember, the Octavia Butler grant for Clarion, is that something you apply for? How does that work? Does anyone know? You do, right? So when you're applying to Clarion, you can also apply for the Butler grant. I was one of the founders of the Carl Brandon Society for People of Color in Fiction. I think what we ended up with are not grants, but awards. The setup is a little bit different because those are given for, I tend to think of the distinction, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but as grants are for work in progress, awards are given to work that's already been published. You know, there's some fuzziness there, but the Carl Brandon, I think, is set up like the Tiptree, where anyone can nominate work from a previous, that was published in the previous year, and then those works are considered for that year's award. So
I'd like to piggyback on what Marianne spoke of about connecting with your local governments, whether it be city, county, or state. So for example, the California Arts Council, they offer grants specifically in the literary arts field. And you know, you can, once you sort of get connected, they all have program officers. You can call them and you can talk with them, you can schedule appointments with them, and you can ask them, okay, in this region, who can you connect me to that offers grants for this particular genre? So while I'm in the visual arts, there's a robust amount of grants in all of the arts, but your state can direct you in those areas. And then once you get on their mailing list, they can send you, you know, when the upcoming grants are going to be posted. The other piece that I would like to offer is that most of the grants offer technical assistance, meaning that they have these sessions that sort of walk you through the process of the grants. They also have these sort of one-on-one sessions that you can sign up with the program officer, where they can help you with assistance with, you know, like if your bio is not together and or if your artist statement is not together, they can direct you into some free services where you can get some support in those areas. And I'm not trying to take up the floor because I'm in the visual arts. I'm trying to give space for specifically for the speculative writers. But I also want to say that collaborations is also another way. So for example, last year we brought in Afrofuturism into a children's art museum, right? Which is like, okay, well, why? Because children need access too. Children need to see that. And so it was kind of like, how does Afrofuturism get to the visual arts field, right? But we worked on collaborating and how do you sort of mend those two concepts, the children, visual arts, and Afrofuturism together. So I think that collaboration is also another way that you can gain exposure to other types of grants that are outside of the speculative arts field.
I'd like to piggyback on the information about CAP. I'm out in St. Louis right now. I used to live in the Bay Area, but no longer. And out here, there's an organization called the Midwest Artist Project. In addition to those kinds of resources for grants, they also have like a pitch practice session where you get up in front of a board and you talk about your project as though you're going to give a presentation, and they'll give you feedback on your presentation, how you're talking about it, the kind of information you're including. So there might be resources in the local organization beyond what you're initially looking for. And as an example of another way that the different types of arts intersect, there was the Antarctic Artists and Writers Program. So if you're interested in visual arts, if you're interested in writing, they will take you down to the Arctic and you can hang out at one of the research stations and learn about what they have to offer.
I put in the chat, What's in Writers Magazine also maintains a reputable grants database. So there are a bunch of them out there. If you just Google grants for writers, various things will pop up. There's certain triage that's important, right? Because you could spend a lot of time applying for things like the Guggenheim and so on, like, which are these big grants that have a lot of money attached. And odds are you might not make it past the first round, right? And so, and I don't want to say, I'm never going to say you have no chance, don't do it. If time is limited and your energy is limited, usually I think a more typical approach is you sort of try and figure out, well, this grant is aimed towards people who have not yet published a book. This will often say so, like flat out, they'll say it in the grants, right? Some of the SLF grants are for people who are not yet pro writers. They have not qualified at SFWA yet. Others are more open. There are some grants that are aimed at mid-career writers. If they're saying that, they're probably thinking you've published multiple at this point. So that can help you fine-tune your energy and where you're going to be aiming. And a lot of it is just talking to people. You know, if someone who you think is sort of working at the same level you are, and it's easier in some ways if you're in grad school because you've got a whole cohort of people who are at a similar stage in their writing career. But if you have a set of people who are all, you know, we've all published 1 or 2 stories, or we've now published 1 or 2 prose stories, talk to each other and say, like, well, where are you applying to grants? And I think there's sometimes people get a little hesitant because they think of it as a competition. And, well, I don't want to share that information because, you know, now this person is also going to apply for this grant. And I guess I would just advise you to try and shed that kind of thinking. It's not about like stealing away your piece of the pie. It's we're all going to work together. We're all going to grow a bigger pie. And the more you can be a good collaborator and a member of the community, I think the better your chances are for long-term success. So,
yeah, I definitely want to connect with that idea. We want to be good literary citizens, right? And we want to be good artistic partners. And I really subscribe to the belief that we all can eat. So like if something comes up and it's like, oh, this is an amazing opportunity, I want to apply for that. And I have a friend who should also apply for that. One of us should get this money or get this opportunity. And maybe the other one might take us out for like a glass of wine or something. I don't know. But like somebody should like, we can share this and we can celebrate one another. And I think that kind of joy and practice and commitment to one another and the practice of like celebrating us in our art making, whatever it is, only increases opportunities, only increases our joy and our capacity. I popped into the chat a few different resources, particularly around residencies. And I also want to second what has been said around looking for local city arts councils. I didn't know this until I just led a course that talked about grants in one session, and I was looking at Berkeley, which is where I live now. And I didn't realize that, I knew that they had an arts council. I knew that they had funding, but I didn't know how much, and I didn't know how many people applied for it. Turns out all that information is publicly accessible. You can go to one of their meetings and they will actually judge and talk about their judging processes, their criteria in front of a public space. All their records are public. And turns out there are like 28 people who apply for a lot of funding. About 14 or so, if I remember correctly, actually get funded. And it's up to around $4,000. So like your opportunity is like a 50-50 shot here. I had no idea. I have lived in Berkeley for 5-6 years. And I didn't know until I researched it, right? Will I be applying for that next year? Yes. And so something for you all to keep in mind, again, like understanding your locality and asking questions. What Nina said around program officers, I was working with one person who got a grant from her local arts council. It was in Portland to support professional development. And for our relationship, I was her coach. And she was talking to me about how before she even applied to the grant, she was talking with the program officers, had incredible ideas, and they helped her to think through how to best position herself in her application before she even turned it in. And I was like, that's an amazing opportunity. Even if she didn't get the grant, right? She still had so much support that she could apply for anything after that. And oftentimes we just don't ask. Or like, I don't like phone calls. I hate phone calls. I like texting, I like emails. But sometimes it's the phone conversation, right? Like, and having that personal connection. So sometimes we got to shake ourselves out of what's uncomfortable to really have support to make our work. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say was around partnering with organizations. So with MoCA, right? Like, And I had done a program with another museum in the Bay Area, the Museum of the African Diaspora. And I remember Aretha White in that program, it was just a poetry series over summer, saying, this felt like a writing residency. And I was like, it did. And so Aretha and I, in our separate spaces, talked with the museum and said, wouldn't it be great if you actually did have a writing residency? And how can we make that happen? And then Elizabeth was like, two people are talking to me about the same thing. Let's all get together and let's make it happen. And they did. They found funding for it. They applied for a grant. They didn't get the grant, but they believed in it so much that they made the Poets in Residence program happen. And it was something too that is essentially built a space for other artists, other writers, other poets to apply to and get an important amount of funding. It was funded at $6,000 for a semester. And that's huge as a teaching artist and getting space in the museum and the reading and all of that. So sometimes your local organizations, your museums, your gallery spaces, your historical societies, if that's a connection with your work, you might reach out to them and say, can we collaborate on something? Because I have this project I'm working on and I think it will run alongside you. Like MoCA and Afrofuturism, like, y'all, this is an opportunity to build in collaboration, like right together. So yeah.
That sounds a lot like what FIA did. It's like there's this whole community that's underserved. Let's just do something about it. I have one more comment and then a question related to what you were saying about reaching out to the organizers of grants. Another research, if you find that you're siloed and you're not in any groups that might be able to give you those resources, look at previous recipients of the grants, like what's on their CV, what organizations are they part of, see if their career path is something that interests you. Like, don't feel obligated to do something that's not really what you're called to do. And my question for the group would be, what is the difference between a grant and a residency? Like, where do they overlap and where do they differ?
I mean, I think that the main thing is the residency typically is a physical location. So, for example, the one in Lake Forest, you go for, I think they have it a minimum of 3 weeks right now. When I went, you could go for 2 weeks, which was better for me because I had small children at the time. But minimum 3 weeks, it's often like 3 to 6 weeks. And the Lake Forest one, the cost is, there's a charge of $30 a day, but that's heavily subsidized by the foundation. And then there are grants that you can also apply for on top of that that might even cancel out the $30 a day. And they bring together 12 people, 12 artists of different disciplines at that one. You get your own room, a shared bathroom, and food. In these beautiful old houses that back onto the prairie, and it was incredibly productive for me. There's a sort of saying that like 1 week in the residency is the equivalent to 4 weeks of work in the outside world. So if you go for 3 weeks, it's like going for 3 months to do, that's how much writing you'd get done. And yeah, I don't know, they're super useful, and I've actually, like, it's another thing that I feel is mostly not on the radar of science fiction fantasy people to even think about applying for. But in grad school, I met one woman who did her MFA and then spent the next 2 years residency hopping, going, like, her income was supported and her food was supported as she went from residency to residency working on her book, right? Which is what they're sort of meant for. They're meant to give writers support. So there are other versions of it, but.
Sorry, do they provide money in addition to a location, or?
Not
that one, but maybe some of them. Raina, maybe
yeah,
we'll know more.
It really depends on the location. For example, McDowell, years ago, I did that when I had no idea. I just applied for things that I saw named many times. And I did not know about the importance of McDowell in many different circles until I got there. And I was like, your art is in the Met? Like, I'm 26. Like, I'm just starting. So yeah, one thing I also encourage people is to just submit to whatever, especially for a residency, wherever you think that you can create, and you have to know who you are. So if you are going to be really feel isolated in isolation, like even more so if that's going to be compounding, like you need to have a regular meal schedule or you need to have people around you, you should not apply to like a space that's on a ranch. Like that's probably not going to work for you. Or the National Park Service, which has residencies all over the world in national parks. Some of them you have to hike in. That ain't my jam. Like, but if it's yours, like, cool. There are spaces for you. You can have a residency in a volcano park in Hawaii, y'all. It exists. But you have to know who you are before you even think about applying. Some residencies actually do give you a stipend too. McDowell is that, so that if you have experienced hardship, for example, picking up your life and going there for, I think they go up to 2 months, then you can apply for a stipend that will help you to support those back at home bills. And some residencies, I want to say Kimmel Harding Nelson back in the day when I did that, had like a $100 stipend, which is enough for food, right? So some of them have stipends attached to them. It's worth it to look at it. And sometimes, like, especially if you are at the stage in your career where you can connect a residency with a book tour or something like that, like you can make money while you're there. That's another way to balance off your fees. But yeah, some will help.
But there's a different kind of residency as well, where MoCA does in-school residencies, where we will send a professional teaching artist. We've had teachers do poetry, we've had them do visual arts, we've also done music and a variety of different types of art forms. So those residencies are for a set period of time, it's sequential, it's scaffolded. If you don't have experience teaching children, we offer some support with that to help you scaffold your lessons. So there's other organizations out there that also offer a different type of residencies other than the ones that you're talking about, and those are paid for. You get time, you get prep time, you also get time, meaning you get a wage and it's based on experience. So like our master teachers get paid more than some of our newer teachers. But those are other residencies that several organizations like MoCA offers for all of the arts in general. So not just visual arts, but every form of art in school as well as in libraries.
Yeah, the Museum of the African Diaspora is like that, where they have a teaching residency. You also have workspace at the museum. And so that's really exciting, and a discount in the bookstore. But another thing that I had mentioned before was about applying, proposing rather residencies to organizations. So for example, if you were to say to your local corporate gentrifier, y'all are messing up my neighborhood and you're pushing us out. And how about we just like push back on that, and you create a space for artists like me, and preserve the diversity and the dynamic qualities that are here, and you support that. I think it wouldn't be such a hard sell, actually, to have a space and to say, like, you can't have everything. And so I think we also have to think about how we can propose and push and say, you can't take everything from us. So using our residencies and our arts as activist spaces too.
In terms of how to support that, that's a brilliant idea. It never even occurred to me before. If you're in the US, VLAA.org, VLAA, Volunteer Lawyers and Accountants for the Arts.org, they might be able to help you put together a pitch such that it would appeal to the evil corporate gentrifier. They also have a lot of really good resources for, any of those related contractual or accountant questions that come up.
I was just going to throw in, and I think we're about to switch to Q&A, but that I had a couple quick things. One is I want to emphasize the smaller grants, because while some of the big grants are anonymized, so all they see initially is your writing sample, I think most are not. Most of them will see a cover letter, a bio, an artist statement first. And so if you've gotten a City of Chicago $500 grant, then when the state of Illinois looks at your application, they know that about you already. And, you know, for better or worse, they're human beings reading these. They have a big stack. They're exhausted. Anything that's going to help them filter, they're going to pay attention to. So having a couple of these little grants in there can very much be a stepping stone to the bigger ones. I wanted to mention what Raina was saying about the local community and developers and so on. So last year we started talking about, and we applied for, and we were a finalist for a $50,000 local grant for the SLF. We didn't get it. We'll apply again if they do it again, to build a makerspace in Chicago, in Oak Park. And the idea was to actually have some in Oak Park, some in our neighboring Austin, some in Berwyn, which are lower income areas and majority Black and Hispanic, and work with people in those communities and have partnerships going back and forth. And anyway, this like consumed my life for much of a year. It didn't happen, and then we were going to start one. We were going to just put down some money for a space in June, and then COVID happened. So we're like, maybe we shouldn't gather everyone together for classes and workshops and, you know, 3D printers and whatever else. But eventually we'll get this locked down, we'll get it under control, and I am hoping that we'll do it again. I'll say it's not, when you're talking to developers, and so we talked to some developers, we talked to business people at local colleges, they kind of want some concrete businessy stuff. So, you know, and I kind of came in with my airy, artsy, you know, academic backgroundy thing, and they're like, well, show us the numbers, and what's the demographic research you've done, and, you know, what surveys have you done to show that there's a real need in the community? And I was like, okay, how about you give me a list of the things you would want before working with us on this, and I'll come back to you. So I'm not saying not to do it. Dream big, ask. You never know, right? Like, it can't hurt to ask. But I think some of the bigger things will take coming together in community, getting a bunch of people excited about it, finding people who have the skills that you don't have, right? Maybe you need to hire a bookkeeper if you don't love keeping the books yourselves, right? Like, all of that together to do these bigger projects, which, you know, I'd love to see a flowering of all of that, both for speculative fiction and more generally. And we're hoping to do a residency program. I wasn't sure, like I ended up like, there's a Facebook group for residencies. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it. I haven't looked at it in a while. But I asked on there, you know, I know they're mostly in rural areas. Would there be any interest in one that's near Chicago? And a ton of people said, oh, I live in a rural area. I would love to come to a big city, right? And that was great. That was great to know. Oh no, Raina's leaving. It was so great having you. Do you want to add anything else before you go? No? Okay.
No, thank you. Y'all are brilliant.
It was so great. And like, if we get this residency program started, I'm going to be calling you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I will apply myself. I will help. I'll be one of your GoFundMe people, like all of that.
Excellent. And the last thing, I guess, before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to mention, Setsu had mentioned that you've moved to St. Louis from the Bay Area. And, you know, all of this is about making it possible for you to financially pursue your art. And the Bay Area is super expensive as a place to live. And I know, I'm trying to remember who it was, a Black science fiction writer I know who moved to Mexico to make it more affordable. And I'm blanking on her name. She's got books out, and it'll come back to me. But that's like, you can attack the problem from both ends, right? There's the getting people to give you money, but also asking like, where is my money going? So, all right.
Awesome. This has been amazing. I've appreciated so much of this knowledge and you know, everything y'all are dropping down here. These are just gems all over the place. So we are gonna switch to the Q&A portion, but before we do that, Audrey, Are we
Yeah,
we're doing something else?
everybody,
Okay.
we noticed that we seem to have people from like a bunch of different geographic locations. I am going to launch a poll right now. 60 seconds here. If you don't mind giving us an answer, where are you located? I am so sorry. There is a limited amount of options I was able to drop in here. There is not a fill in the blank option. So let's take a second here. I think once the votes are in, the poll will go away. Also, thank y'all for being my guinea pigs. This is my first poll on a webinar on Zoom, so this is pretty cool. We can ask questions and get real-time answers. It's nice. Oh man, I was hoping we had some of our Voodoo Knot family from Africa on this call. No, not yet. Okay, couple more seconds. I think when we get to 1 minute, I think the poll goes away. I think that's how it works. Let's see. And one more second, and there we go. Okay. Well, looks like most of the people are local. West Coast wins it, and then we've got East Coast followed by other. And let's see. I'm from Voodoo Knots. Hi, hey Rochelle. Harlem's in the house. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I don't want to take too much time away from Q&A. Just wanted to get a check-in and see where y'all were at. So thank you. We'll share the results of that. All right, and pass it back to you, Jasmine.
Awesome. Okay, so I am looking in the Q&A spot in Zoom. So for those of you who are here as attendees, you should be able to see down in the bottom a section that says Q&A. So if you want to add a question to the queue, feel free to do that now. And I guess we'll just run through them.
I can start with this first one. Two things jump to mind. There's the question, are there any grants for groups of writers rather than an individual? So the two things that pop up, poets and writers, I assume this is still running, they have grants, matching grants for honoraria. So you have to be giving the writer cash, and you can apply to have that amount matched. So it's get used a lot for things like reading series and so on. SFWA also gives grants to writers. So for science fiction, fantasy, well, and specifically to organizations. So it's essentially the same thing. No, we're not allowed to give them honoraria. We're allowed to reimburse for travel expenses is what SFWA is set up as. But the SLF applied for funds to launch our reading series here in Chicago, Deep Dish, and SFWA gave us $1,000 the first year and $1,000 the second year, and we used that both for reimbursing a couple of out-of-town panelists for travel expenses and for paying a videographer to record everything and edit them so that we could put the readings online. So those are my thoughts.
Perfect. Becca, do you have something you'd like to add? Okay, perfect. Go ahead. Oh.
Yes, I just want to add that what Mary Ann is referring to is the Givers Fund grants for the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, and I will put that specific link into the chats. But it's coming up soon, so you all need to get on it. It's coming up on October 1st is the deadline, and then they're going to award funds by the end of the year. Again, to reemphasize, it is not for giving individual money to people, individuals, and that can also be, it's not for organizations to give honoraria to people in specific, but it can help you out with all other sorts of organizing an event. So it can help you out with, your Zoom membership software, for event fees when we can actually, meet in person again sometime. So anything that isn't directly being paid to an individual, the Givers Fund grant can help out with.
Awesome. We have a question about COVID's effect on grants and the availability of grants. Does anyone have any knowledge they want to share on that one?
This might be tangential, but I've seen organizations like Odyssey, like Clarion, putting up a lot of workshops online, kind of pushing the network and the knowledge base out to a broader audience. So that might be one resource.
Yeah, I would say we our grants development person, not our grants person, administrator was ill separately, and then our development director got COVID in March, actually, and she has had a very long, slow recovery. So she's still not up to full strength again. And so we pushed out our grants, and I think that happened for a lot of organizations. I think we pushed them like 3 months, but we're now back up to, sort of regular schedule again, I think, at this point. So that's mostly what I'm seeing. I think like there were some, I would expect to see some big dips in funding in the next year or two as the long-term economic consequences of COVID play out, unfortunately. So.
I would say that there's an increase, well, specifically for Black-led organizations, there's an increase in funding right now. I'm sure that'll go away sometime around February, but in this moment, there are more funding opportunities for Black-led organizations as well as Black artists. So.
Awesome. Has anyone heard of like a virtual residencies because of the pandemic? I don't know if residencies are jumping on this.
I haven't seen anything, and my contention is that the word of the year is pivot, and there is not as much urgency about pivoting something like a residency program as opposed to like pivoting all the kids who have to be in school and what are we going to do about that situation. I would expect to see more of that. I mean, now I think one of the things we've been looking at with the SLF is I've attended 8 conventions virtually since COVID started, which has been really interesting, sort of seeing like what's working, what's not working. There's some great opportunities that are coming with these virtual conventions in terms of disability access, economic access, and so on, and globalization. Seeing people from all over the world who normally could not afford to fly to Worldcon are now able to participate. So that's terrific, and I would hope and expect, I'm in Chicago, Worldcon is going to be here in, I think, 2022, and they are definitely already planning for a strong virtual component for that, even if we have an in-person convention. So I'm hoping that's going to become the default. At the SLF, we've been talking about, it's going to take us a little while to slowly build this out in terms of like it's volunteer time and my time to like organize the volunteers, but we were thinking about having sort of like almost a rolling convention that would just be ongoing, right? Like every Saturday, we just started this yesterday, every Saturday from 10 to 1, co-writing in the Zoom, right? You can just drop in these panels that the local chapters are doing, and then building out from there. I was thinking for Halloween, we might try to do a 24-hour spooky reading where we just like scheduled like different authors for every 15 minutes or something like that. And it would just be a room and you could drop in at any time and hear someone reading something spooky. So anyway, well, I think it's a exciting thing, but we're all very much still in the midst of it. So.
On the heels of that, I'd like to give a shout out to Dream Foundry, which is an organization specifically geared toward early career writers who are just starting out, but also artists and anyone involved in the speculative arts. They're also looking at games, they're looking at sound design. There's lots of opportunities for collaboration and to learn about different expressions in media.
Awesome. I want to, speaking of pivot real quick, and then maybe we'll pivot back. For those of you who have been jurors for grants, what are some of the common mistakes you see people making that kind of knocks them out of the running for grants, or things that we might think about now about avoiding?
I mean, for some of the city-state grants, like as a juror, I would not see this because it wouldn't have gotten to me if they had made mechanical errors, right? If they didn't include their artist statement or whatever else, that would have been either, if it's a smaller thing, maybe you have a program administrator who reaches out to you and says there's a problem, please resubmit. For the big grants, making that kind of mistake, you're just knocked out, right? So I don't know, follow the directions, make a checklist, check each thing as you go, right? If it only comes around once a year, it's worth taking a little time on that. So that's just a purely logistical thing. By the time it gets to the jurors, I'm honestly, in terms of like mistakes, it's not really so much about mistakes. It's what people are looking for varies, but what I'm looking for maybe is often a unique voice. And I think if there's a mistake, it's people who try to write to the grant, write to what they think the grant administrators are going to want. And I think that often just kind of flattens the work and makes it not interesting. So I don't know, Nina.
Yes, I think for me, one of the issues that I've experienced from doing the city and state is that I don't understand what they're trying to say. So it's like you're reading it and you're like, it's not that there was any editing issues that were necessarily needed, but I don't understand what you're saying. So I think it might be helpful to maybe have someone that's not a friend read your submission and see what they say. What is their response to what you're trying to do? Are they sort of able to re-articulate what you are trying to present? Because oftentimes what is up here is not necessarily connecting to what you put on paper, and there's this huge disconnect. That was my experience. So there were several people that submitted their work, and I just couldn't understand it. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty intelligent. I can read, right? I just did not understand what the purpose of the project was. So.
It's possible that some of the stumbling block there is like writing for an application or writing a query letter or writing a submission. All the business language surrounding your creative project feels really arduous and really alien to what you're used to writing. But ultimately, this is a project you've put so much time and love into because you're really into it and you're interested in it. And if that interest is part of your statement, part of your application materials, that's going to be more sustainable for you because you'll stay more engaged with what you're doing, but it's also going to come across to the reader. So try to not lose that, it sounds trite, but don't lose that authenticity.
Can I just jump back? I didn't realize when I typed an answer that would make the Q&A like shifted over to the answered section. So I just wanted to say this out loud. Someone asked, how do you get letters of recommendation if you're a self-taught author, not a grad of any programs, workshops, or orgs? And I'd say two things. Many grants don't require letters of recommendation. That tends to be more at the larger grants aimed at writers who are mid-careers. Probably you won't have to worry about that. If you do, your college English professor is a good resource for you, even if it was 20 years ago. If one of my students calls me up and they're like, I want to apply for this thing and I need a letter of recommendation, I'll be like, please send me a writing sample. I will take a look at it, refresh my memory, and I'll write you something. So your high school English teacher, you know, that's part of our job. So.
And two things to give the teacher is bullet points for what you want them to say and at least 6 months to do it, because it can be a lot, especially if you're not in constant contact together.
I say diddle to that one, because I get requests all the time, like, and how quickly do you need this? It's helpful to have as much advance notice as possible. And the writing points, that helps too.
Also, it's worth noting that it's hard to tell what might be relevant experience and what might not be. For example, a lot of conventions, getting onto a panel is basically, do you volunteer? Are you mildly entertaining? Can you keep a conversation going? If you're on a panel at a local sci-fi con talking about anything from fandom to some kind of research topic, that all counts. If you're contributing to the conversation, like the grant application panelists will want to know about that.
I know this is kind of off topic. I'm sort of segueing a little bit. I wanted to encourage people to participate as a juror. You will find out a lot of information about how the grants process work. All of the city and state and local government ask for grant panelists. There's an open call for them. You submit your resume. I can't remember else what you submit because I've been only asked versus applying, but you can apply to be a grants panelist. And I think that will be helpful for you to see sort of that angle of vision. And then it'll help you see like what that process looks like, how it's like a tiered system on how you grade people and some of the questions that they want you to sort of answer as a juror. That will be helpful for you to sit on those panels so you can capture all of that data.
Awesome.
I put this in the chat, but I'll just say the SLF also periodically posts calls for jurors, and in particular, we are trying to make a little more effort to match up a little. So like we have a South Asian grant, and we would love to have majority South Asian descent jurors on that grant. So most of the grants that I've served as a juror for, such as the Tiptree or the Carl or like the Lambda, don't pay you, but you learn a lot, and some of the bigger ones do give you an honorarium. So like the Wisconsin Arts Council gave me a couple $100, and the SLF, I think we give you $25 or $50. So like you can buy yourself a nice dinner and thanks. But it's a service to the field. And again, it's sort of part of being a good literary citizen, is that we're all supporting each other in this. So yeah.
And as part of supporting each other, if you are serving on the back end of a grant, you might know other writers who would be eligible, who maybe haven't heard of it, and you could say, hey, there's this thing happening, you should probably apply. And when you're working with other people in a group like that, it's also expanding your network, and you never know which opportunities will come from being nice and easy to work with over here, translate to being easy to work with over there, and people will invite you to things. And it's everything, the same tide raises all ships in terms of good citizenship.
Similarly, when you're trying to learn how to write better, being a slush reader for a magazine, you learn a tremendous amount, right? So I think when you're looking at your own work, and especially if you're looking at your own work in isolation, it can be difficult to see the flaws, but that's part of what workshopping is good for, because if you see your classmates making the same kinds of errors over and over and they're grading on you, when you go back to your story, you're like, oh, I did that same thing, right? Let me take care of that before I show it to somebody else. And slush reading is super useful for exactly that as well.
It makes it much more comfortable being an editor as well, especially of your own work, because you can look at it from a technical perspective rather than a very poignantly emotionally invested perspective, because you have a better view of what else is out there.
We have a question in the Q&A about applying and receiving grants if you do not have 501c3 designation. This feels like a good spot to maybe talk about fiscal sponsorship and explain what that is and how that might work, whether you're an organization or an individual artist.
Or,
Posted in the, sorry.
No, that's okay. Setsu, what were you saying?
Oh, the article that I posted on the SIFWA blog has a couple of resources for people that are specifically not nonprofits. So there's money on the table everywhere. You just have to know how to look for it.
Yeah, so it seemed like this was sort of for organizations that don't have 501c3 status yet. So the SLF is a 501c3. One of the things we do is we offer fiscal sponsorship. And what that means is that essentially we're loaning out our 501c3 status to orgs that are nonprofits generally, although I don't think that's a requirement. But our mission, that have a similar mission to ours, that fall under our brief, if that makes sense. So we've been a fiscal sponsor for FogCon in the Bay Area, for the Odyssey writing workshops, until they had a chance to go through the 501c3 process themselves, which is actually much faster than it used to be, but I think it still is probably a few $100s to apply. And what that lets you do is, if you have a fiscal sponsor, then people can donate money to you and take the tax deduction, right? And it passes through the fiscal sponsor, who typically takes a small percentage, somewhere between 5 and 7% is, I think, pretty standard. Some places may charge a little more for essentially the administrative work of dealing with the money. So yeah, I don't know. Nina, do you have anything to add?
That was spot on. You can also apply for grants with a fiscal sponsor as well. So it's not just doing certain types of work, but if you want to apply for some of the larger grants, then you can typically for the larger grants, the 501c3s or the nonprofits typically ask for about 10%. That's been my experience. Not sure about in the speculative arts, because some of the grants have pretty extensive reporting requirements. It takes hours to gather and capture that information so that your report doesn't get rejected. And so that's why sometimes it can be as much as about 10% or so.
Did we answer the game question? It seems to have moved off.
I didn't see the game question.
There was a question about grants for game writers, and I mostly just wanted to say I don't know anything about them. And so, oh yeah, it says, for game authors and mixed media, what are the best grant sources? Setsu, I'm doing some game writing now, but I haven't looked into grants for it yet.
The only one I've found that sort of, maybe if you twist it the right way, applies is an organization called Wave Farm, like a sound wave. They're particularly interested in sonic arts, and if you were to pitch them a project that was a game, you would have to justify it as a piece of art in addition to being a game. Yeah, that's the only specific one that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think this is where the collaboration comes into play. So Mocha is working on a project where we are mixing gaming, Afrofuturism, and visual arts into one really large project, and with a heavy focus on futurism. And so I think that for those of us that don't see grants that apply to us, you might want to consider collaborating with an organization or a group of folks where you can sort of pitch a grant that you can, you have your piece of it and then the others have their piece of it, and it sort of melds together into a pretty fascinating and amazing program. So California Arts Council, all the big arts councils typically have an array of arts programming that you can apply for. The other piece is that a lot of them do the community arts, right? So like gaming would really fall into the community arts piece. And so, just sort of, as imaginative thinkers, right, get creative with how you sort of pitch your idea. And I think that the more creative and imaginative that you can get, I think that you can align yourself with some of the grant criterias that are out there.
I might also add, and I don't know whether everyone here is going to agree with me on this, but I do think going back to that sort of initial science fiction fantasy is commercial and should be able to be commercially successful. And, I think it depends on the work. It depends on, who you are and what kind of barriers you might be facing, certainly. But I do think that someone who is working more in the tradition of Le Guin or Delaney on the more literary side is more likely to get a grant than someone writing in the tradition of, say, Brandon Sanderson, right, who's writing big, epic, popular fantasy. So, and to some extent that kind of makes sense, right, because the whole point of the grants is to often support work that is not commercially viable, is going to face barriers, is a little weird, a little unusual, that the marketplace hasn't quite figured out how do I promote and connect this kind of work with the readership. So, for something like game writing, I was sort of thinking if I were pitching, what would I do if I wanted to try and get grant support for a narrative game, say, that I was working on? I would probably formulate my artist statement to talk about it as a piece of experimental writing, especially if it was going to a state arts council or something like that. Just sort of thinking through who's likely to be on these juries, what can they compare this to that is going to make sense to them, as opposed to saying this is going to be the hottest new phone game for 22-year-olds, right? That's not going to excite them. So
I'd like to do a plug also for a podcast called Script Lock, which talks about narrative design and writing for games. And one of the things that came up on that podcast was that the idea of a game is you're, on the one hand, there's just kind of like, you know, lasers and explosions and stuff. But on the other hand, you're creating a space of potentiality. So like there is a way to talk about games in these very artistic, you know, kind of esoteric terms. And if that's more what that particular board wants to see, and those are the ideas the board wants to explore, there's certainly a way to make it fit the shape of what they're asking for.
Awesome. Well, I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists. You're all amazing and brilliant. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We're just so grateful. And I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I might go do some writing after this. I'm feeling inspired. So, but before we go, we just wanted to check in with the audience and see if there's any other questions, burning things you want to ask before we call it a day and continue our Sundays.
Well, while we're waiting to see that, I will just say, since we have people from elsewhere, if you're interested in starting a local chapter of the SLF, drop me a note. My email is, I'll put it in there, director@speculativliterature.org. And mostly what we ask is that you have 3 people committed to working on this, and then just like fabulous Audrey, Becca, and Jasmine here, and then I'll probably make them tell you what to do to set up a chapter. So, because they've just joined, but they have like picked up the ball and just been running with it gorgeously, and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here. We have a Chicago chapter which was doing the reading series, and now we're a little bit like trying to figure out what are we doing next with the Chicago chapter. But it does exist, so you could join that. I think there's a mailing list. But there are a lot of possibilities. I had another organization, Desi Lit, that had local chapters in London and LA and Toronto, and they put on like 4-day literary festivals. They had monthly writing workshops. They had reading series, certainly. They had community meetups where they just got together to write in cafes. So there's a lot of possibilities for building community support, and we're hoping at the SLF it's pretty soon we're going to be launching a Kickstarter for a podcast that Ben Rosenbaum and I are doing as part of our Portland project. And along with that, we're going to be setting up, I believe, a Discord server, which we have to figure out the moderation for it. So to make it a space that's going to be a healthy, good space. So if you're interested in being one of our moderators, come talk to me. So that's all, yeah. So there's only the 2 chapters so far. We just started local chapters, and we just started them because last year I kind of did a survey on Facebook and so on of like what people wanted out of our organization. And while they love the grants, one of the main things people said is they really wanted more local community. So local community is a little different right now during COVID, but I think it still helps having regional stuff. And you could put on masks and go meet in a park while the weather holds. So, all right, I'll mute again.
And there are organizations like Codex or SIFWA, while they're not necessarily SLF, the resources are there, the people are there. If there is interest, there's no reason not to try.
And just before everybody goes away, I just want to make sure that you all know that next month we are not doing an event for our Bay Area chapter of the Speculative Literature Foundation, and that is because FIACon is taking place, which is going to be amazing. And most of you here are going to be going to it. We highly encourage you to check it out. I think they might be almost out of registrations by now, though I think they said there might be some more opening up right at the beginning of October. But Fiacon is by Fialit Magazine, launched in 2016, and is a quarterly magazine that features speculative fiction stories by and about Black people of the African diaspora. Their description of the conference is, "We've wanted to host a convention almost since our inception, and now we're in a place to pull it off. Our mission for the convention is to reach beyond the magazine's origins centering Black voices, to celebrate the contributions of our friends and communities which lack our visibility, and by welcoming allies to participate in the celebration with us." So you totally want to check out Fiacon with us. In November, we are planning to do a talk with an expert as well, but we haven't quite figured out those details yet. But our goal is to inspire you and your fiction by inspiring your mind with great topics that just get speculative fiction brains thinking and going.
I have two notes. One, a suggestion. At some point, we did this for Designation in Chicago, and it was incredibly helpful. We brought in a tax person to talk about taxes for writers, and specifically, before you're making a profit, for years beforehand, you can be collecting, you can be writing off deductions, and it can save you a significant amount of money. It reduces your overall, God, I'm going to blank on all of the words. You know, you have this like total amount that you earned over the year, but then you file a Schedule C for your small business as a writer. You get to take like, well, I had 5,000 in losses because I went to these conventions and I bought a laptop and I sold a story for $50, right? Then that drops it down, your overall thing. So if you had W-2s that were taking out money, you actually get a refund on a chunk of that money in March. And so lots of writers don't know to do that or are scared to do that. And I think having a tax person familiar with the arts who can walk you through how to do it well is incredibly useful. And then the other note is I strongly recommend everyone check out these virtual conventions. So Fiacon, absolutely. I think I may not have registered yet, but I'm totally planning to attend. Futuricon is Eurocon's online thing. One of the things that I think is this weekend I was attending two conventions, FutureCon and this, which was a global thing, Future SF Con, and the Untitled convention, which was hosted in Helsinki, but virtual. And it's a great opportunity this year because they're so much cheaper. Like they're so much cheaper. A lot of these conventions would have been a $200 registration plus travel costs, and virtually they're like $10 donation, you know. And it's a tremendous resource. I went to I can't remember if it was the Nebulas or Worldcon, but like Lois McMaster-Bujold, who is one of my favorite writers, was guest of honor, and she was like hanging out in a room, and I got to like hang out with her and ask all my questions and not sound too much like a drooling fangirl. So it was terrific. Yeah. So strongly recommend you check those out.
I guess open the floor.
Seconding all that.
Well, one last plug I wanted to say before we open the floor totally. I just wanted to thank everyone again for joining us on their Sunday afternoon. And please like our Facebook group. We've started the Speculative Literature Foundation. They have their main group, obviously. We now have a San Francisco Bay Area chapter Facebook group. And Jasmine and I separately have Ancestral Futures Press, which is a local Black, Indigenous, people of color, speculative fiction nonprofit that is totally focused on speculative literary arts and education. So please check us out, ancestralfutures.org, and follow us on social media because we're doing cool stuff. Thank you.